All right, guys. So we are going to cover chapter 34, which is on animal nutrition and digestion in this chapter. And hopefully everyone can see the PowerPoints we're going to go through, just like we would in the face-to-face class. So let's get going. We got animal nutrition and digestion. Of course, nutrition is important. It is absolutely vital. Without food, um, we would cease to exist because we are not photoheterotrophs. Um, Photoautotrophs, we're heterotrophs, we're chemoheterotrophs. So we need the chemicals. How do we get the chemicals? We got to break down our food. Let's talk about digestion. Um, these are super easy things that we've talked about since you were in grade school, right? Does it eat plants? Does it eat animals? What does it eat? So we have herbivores, are plant eaters. They're going to eat the our primary producers, our plants, our herbivores, big and small. Carnivores, big and small. Carnivores are going to eat other animals, other organisms out there. Are carnivores. Omnivores are both. You, me, most of us are omnivores, unless you have dietary restrictions. And maybe you're not an omnivore. Maybe you're a vegetarian. But if you are eating plants and animals, meat and veg, it is an omnivore. And so we have the type of teeth that we have are specific because we're omnivores, just like that bear is. He's an omnivore. Bears are super gigantic in size. But the funny thing is, they eat super tiny little things like termites and little moths and blueberries and huckleberries, but they get massive. So they eat lots of it, but they're omnivore. They don't just eat meat, they will eat little bitty grubs and bugs and berries and all sorts of stuff. Omnivores, herbivores, carnivores. Skipping on past it. So, what type of digestion do these things have? So, remember when we talked about cnidarians and we said they could be the polyp form? They're all polypy guys. These are polyps. And those were the ones on the ground, like anemones. They were on the seafloor. Or we had our medusas on the cnidarians, and those were our typical jellyfish. When you think about jellyfish, that's them. But both of these guys had this thing. They had this gastrovascular cavity, and so we said they sting their prey with their cnidocytes, and nematocysts in the cnidocytes, and they stun it, and they bring it back, and they swallow it down in their mouth, and it goes into this thing. The gastrovascular cavity is where they're going to break down their food and digest it, get the nutrients out of it, whatever they want, and then whatever's left over is waste, and so they will get rid of the waste and kick that out. So what goes in gets broken down, and then it goes back out. Goes back out. So this guy is going to have incomplete digestion tract, which is fine. It works for them. So everything goes in and out, same place for these guys, for our incomplete digestion tract on our cnidarians. But then we've got this guy. We've got a nematode, and food will go in here in his mouth, and then he's going to go all this GI tract. It's got his pharynx going down to his intestine, where he's going to absorb all the nutrients, and then eventually it goes out. So it is a one-way trip through this guy, complete digestion tract. So incomplete or two-way, and this one is complete. One-way track for these guys. So know the difference between those two. Let me go through notes. We covered those guys. Let's keep moving on. We got a lot to cover. The gastric, how many stomachs, basically? So like here's ours. We have one stomach. This is what we know. This is how we are. Food comes down. It gets churned around, and lots of enzymes are mixing with it. Acid is mixing with it in the stomach. We are monogastric because we just have one stomach. But ruminants, things that eat plants, we talked about cells and how plant cells have the cell wall, right? And plant cells are going to have this insoluble fiber that makes up their plant cell walls and all this stuff. So it takes longer to digest. If you are an herbivore, your GI tract is going to look a little bit different than a carnivore or an omnivore. So if we were talking about herbivores, they are going to have a little bit different. So we got one stomach But if you look all the way through here, small intestine, small intestine, small intestine, when we skip over to the large intestine, there's this little pouchy place between the small intestine and large intestine. The little pouchy place is called the cecum. So here's ours. You can see we are omnivores, and ours is about this big, relatively speaking, in relation to the little dangly guy right there. That's your appendix. That little worm-like piece. That's your appendix. The cecum on the plant eater is huge because they are going to house your cecum's going to house lots of bacteria that help you break down stuff. The cecum, if you are a plant eater, is really big. Cecum's really big. So you can see all of this is the cecum on this bunny rabbit in the picture. And then that little wormy guy, it also has an appendix too. You absolutely can live without your appendix. I am a candidate for that because I don't have mine anymore. But that is the cecum, and the appendix dangles off the cecum. Plant eaters have a really big cecum compared to omnivores, and carnivores have a really tiny one. Meat eaters, real small. But these are monogastric, just the one stomach, as opposed to birds. Birds, avians, are going to have slightly different. This is kind of similar, sort of, kind of, to the earthworm that's going to have a crop in the gizzard. But we're going to look at the birds. Let's look at the birds. So birds are going to peck at the ground, pick up their food. It's going to go down their food chute. They've got an esophagus, just like we have an esophagus. We all have food chutes, the esophagus that goes down. And then for the birds, it's going to go down the esophagus to this structure here. This is the crop. So sometimes birds will eat gravel because it helps their digestion. It will eat the gravel, it will stick around in the crop, and the little pellets of gravel will break up the large portion of food, wherever the food is, some kind of seed or something like that. Those rocks, the little pebbles in the crop, help grind it up. So it kind of acts like a mini stomach in that aspect. And it comes down to the gizzard. So we got crop, then it moves down, and we got gizzard. And then we're going to have some enzymes to break this stuff down. And it goes into the same place we all have, a small intestine, to absorb the stuff. So lots of absorption there in the small intestine. So when we talk about people, for example, this is where I'm telling you all of your nutritional stuff, most of the nutritional absorption is happening in the small intestine, not the large intestine, the small intestine. By the time we get to the large intestine, most of the nutrition has been pulled out, and that's mostly waste, and we got to suck the water out of it. And then what's left over is just going to get defecated out. So with birds, everything kind of goes out this one place, the cloaca. So they don't have two separate places. They just have the one where number one and number two go out on the cloaca. So this is birds' digestion. They don't have the monogastric like we do with one stomach. They have the crop, and they have a gizzard. The ruminants, the plant eaters that are not monogastric, they have multiple chambers. So we've got a goat or a cow. It can be either one of these things. If you've watched Food Inc., I highly recommend Food Inc. It's a really good one. It's an older-ish documentary, but fascinating if you have not heard about how the food gets to your table. If you're not sure how that happens, when you just get stuff at the grocery store and assume that you don't know how that happens, how it gets there, watch Food Inc. It's really important. And you will get an inside shot of a ruminant's stomach in that documentary. Lots of other better things in there, but it's got a shot of the rumen of an animal. So the animal is going to bring its grass, whatever it's eating, and it's going to swallow it down, and it's going to go into these different chambers. So we have multiple chambers. We have a reticulum, there's an omossum, there's an abomossum, and there's a rumen, and the food will go through these chambers, back up. If it's a cow, it comes back up. We chew, chew, chew. So when you hear about a cow chewing its cud, that's what it's doing. It's going to come back up, and it's going to chew a little more, and then it goes back down. But because the vegetation matter that these guys eat are really hard to break down, their gut is going to be filled, those ruminants are going to be filled with bacteria that help break stuff down. They're going to be filled with archaea that breaks stuff down. So all the prokaryotes that are beneficial for this animal populates its gut biome, and it helps it break down this plant matter that's really hard to break down. So ruminants can do it. They have 4 chambers, 1, 2, 3, 4, and a true ruminant with 4 chambers. There are some that have 3 chambers, and those are pseudo-ruminants. Pseudo-ruminants. So an example of a pseudo-ruminant, an alpaca. Alpaca, the cutie patooties, like little llamas, have 3 stomachs. They are pseudo-ruminants. Okay, we're moving on to people. There's a lot of information in here as far as the human digestive system. I will tell you that I'm not going to go through every single thing in the outline, not all of it, but I will cover major components. So the first thing on your GI tract is you're going to ingest your food and you've got to chew it up, right? And it's going to happen in your mouth, your oral cavity. So you're going to chew it up, chew, chew, chew. You have your teeth that are going to help chew things up. Your cheeks are going to help keep things where they need to be. Your stomach, your tongue is going to move the food around and make sure that you chew everything up to the consistency you want before you swallow it down. So you've got your teeth, and then you've got some salivary glands. You've got salivary glands. So these guys, the parotid is this big one over here by your masseter muscle, by your jawline. You have a submandibular, which is going to be underneath the mandible. So this is your mandible. Your jaw is your mandible. Underneath there is your submandibular gland. And then underneath your tongue is the sublingual gland. All of those together, those 3 things are called your salivary glands, and they are going to secrete amylase and lipase. These are 2 different enzymes that attack 2 different macromolecules. So we learned about the 4 macromolecules in 1107, right? We learned about carbs, we learned about proteins, we learned about, why am I blanking? Lipase, and we learned about nucleic acids. Those were our 4 macros. So if we were talking about amylase, amylase will break down carbs. So we have salivary amylase that is coming from our salivary glands. Is going to produce salivary amylase to break down carbs. What do we think lipase, it's in the name, lipase is going to break down lipids. Lipase breaks down lipids. So you have lingual lipase. So we can break down carbs and lipids in our mouth. Actually, not a whole bunch of lipid action because BIOL helps that, and we'll get to that later, but definitely carbs. So if you were eating a cracker or a saltine or whatever you got in your mouth, something starchy like that, you can start breaking down those carbs. You can break down those carbs in your mouth with amylase, and lipase starts to break down the fats a little bit. All right, so that's the mouth. We're going to swallow the food down. So we're going down the food chute. The food chute is the esophagus. The food bolus, that little food ball, the ball of food that you have chewed up and you have swallowed, that's your food bolus, is going down the food chute. It doesn't matter, right, if you are standing on your head, if you are upside down, if you are twirling around, you are going to move that food through your GI tract. So you're going to have smooth muscle that lines your GI tract, and that smooth muscle is going to push the food through. And that wave-like contraction of the smooth muscle to move the food from point A to point B, that's going to be called peristalsis. Peristalsis is the wave-like rhythmic contraction of the smooth muscle to move the food along the GI tract from point A to point B. Is peristalsis. It's kind of like if you ever use those Go-Gurts or some sort of tube, or it's hot right now, popsicles. If you get those little squeezy popsicles, same process. Your smooth muscle is doing peristalsis to move the food through. Right, the stomach. Moving on down to the stomach. So here's our esophagus. We're moving on down, and we end up here in the stomach. The stomach is going to have its enzyme that breaks stuff down. Pepsin is going to be peptidase, and it is going to break down a macro that starts with P. So what's the macro that starts with P? It's not carbs, it's not lipids, it's not nucleic acids, it's proteins. So pepsin is produced in the stomach, and it breaks down proteins. And so now we have broken down 3 of our macromolecules along the way that we've talked about. Comes down the esophagus, hits the stomach. The stomach's going to produce hydrochloric acid, which is super duper acidic. It's like a pH of 1. It is going to produce pepsinogen, that is going to break down the proteins. And the stomach is lined with lots of smooth muscle, 3 different types of smooth muscle that helps it churn, and mix up the food. So we're doing mechanical processing just like we did in the mouth. When we are moving the food around, physically moving it, mechanical processing happens in the mouth, happens in the stomach because we are churning all the food around. We are doing chemical processing when we are breaking down the macros. So we talked about how we have lingual lipase and salivary amylase to break down carbs and lipids in the mouth. We have pepsin in the stomach that can break down protein. So we are doing chemical digestion and mechanical digestion all along the GI tract, all throughout. So we made it to the stomach, and then we go from the stomach into the small intestine. So we got the small intestine. It's really long. All together, the three different parts of the small intestine that y'all don't need to know are about 20 feet long when you add it all up, roughly somewhere around there. Here's the three parts. I'm not going to make you memorize them at all. We got a small intestine. All of this is a small intestine. It's all small intestine. And that is where, again, one more time, the nutrition is coming in on the small intestine. So you've broken your food down. Mechanically, you've processed it. Chemically, you've processed it. When it leaves the stomach, this little part right here is called the duodenum. You don't need to know it, but the duodenum is going to have a whole bunch of chemical secretions from its brush border cells. This very, very super duper important organ over here is the pancreas. The pancreas, he's hiding right here, is this little guy in yellow, kind of tucked in behind the stomach. That's the pancreas. The pancreas releases a ton of secretions. You don't need to know them, but if you took anatomy and physiology, you would. The pancreas is going to produce a whole bunch of secretions. The pancreas is an endocrine gland and an exocrine gland. It's going to make a whole bunch of secretions to break down carbs, to break down lipids, to break down proteins, to break down nucleic acids. They break down all the stuff from secretions from the pancreas. So all combined, you got duodenal secretions, you got pancreatic secretions, and we have done so much chemical digestion and mechanical digestion. And now all in here in the jejunum and the ileum, we're just going to suck that stuff up. We're going to bring the nutrition. We've broken it down into its little individual monomers, and we're going to absorb that into the bloodstream. So we're going to absorb. And when we leave the small intestine, we said that there was that little pouchy area that we were just talking about when we talked about the monogastrics and the cecoms. So here's our cecum. This little bit right here is our cecum that goes in between the stomach and the small intestine. It's that little area right at that connection spot. Here's our cecum. Here's our appendix. And again, we're omnivores, so our cecum is like medium size, I guess, in comparison. That's our cecum. And then all the rest of this up is ascending colon, going across is transverse colon, going down is descending colon. And then this S-like is the sigmoid colon. All of that is the large intestine or the colon, all of that. So everything in green, all this green stuff, this is large intestine or your colon. And then it'll reach the very end of it is the rectum, and all of this stuff, once it's made it through small intestine, we pulled out all the nutrients that we want, basically. When it goes into the large intestine, we're pulling out water. We have a gut biome that works for us, that helps us with our vitamin production. So we may produce some vitamins from our gut biome in this area, but a lot of water absorption happens in the colon. And then as it gets to the end, we're going to compact it. And then when we're ready, when we can, we're going to get rid of that stuff and defecate it out. So these are all the parts of the GI tract. This is our food chute, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, and out. But we do have the accessory glands. Super duper important one was the pancreas that I was telling you all about. It's the little yellow one. It's hiding. Then we also have the liver and the gallbladder. These guys are important because we're talking about lipids, right? Lipids could be broken down with lipase, which is a great enzyme, but lipids are really, they can be big, chunky molecules that we need to break down. And a thing that helps us break it down is bile. Liver makes bile. Bile looks green. It's kind of greenish yellow color. And what bile does is it's an emulsifier. It acts like your Dawn dish soap. You put that, Dawn dish soap in there, right? And it breaks up the big globs of fat into smaller globs of fat. It's called emulsification. That's what bile does for us. So your liver makes the bile. The liver makes the bile. It produces the bile. And then the bile gets stored in this guy, in the gallbladder. So it ends up there. So the liver makes it all up here. And then it goes down these tubules and it gets stored here in the little green guy, which is the gallbladder. And then when you eat fatty foods, the gallbladder and the liver are going to release the bile that helps break up the fats. And then your lipase can come along and break down the fats. But the bile helps emulsify it, break it into smaller bits. And then the lipase comes along and helps you break it down even better and absorb it. If you are somebody who does not, I don't have my appendix, I had appendicitis and it's gone. If you had to have gallbladder surgery and you don't have your gallbladder, um, you may need to watch what food you intake. You don't want a whole bunch of greasy, high fat food because you don't have the gallbladder to hold all that bile for you. And sometimes I've heard that the cystic duct that leads into the gallbladder starts to take over and it starts to pretend to be a gallbladder and to store that bile for you. But bile is going to help break down your fats, break down your lipids, and emulsify them into small bits. And then lipase comes along and takes care of it. That is a whole bunch of stuff that we have covered in 34.1. So much stuff. Close-ups, if you're curious about what the small intestine looks like on a cellular level. So this is the microscopic anatomy. The small intestine, we said, was where all the nutrition gets soaked up, right? So the more surface area we have in the small intestine, the better. So look, I mean, there's wrinkles on wrinkles and wrinkles. So we've got plicae circularis right here. And then on those wrinkles, we come up and we've got villi. And then on top of the villi, here's a villi right here. Each cell that lines these things have microvilli. So we have so much surface area happening on these columnar shaped, and there's only one row of them, simple columnars along the small intestine. And their little apical surface has microvilli. That looks like a little comb or something. It's just lots of increased surface area on this plasma membrane so it can absorb lots of stuff. So this is the small intestine. I'm not going to go into anything else, any other kind of detail on that. The large intestine, we said, is by the time it gets there, all the good stuff's really been pulled out. We might do a few vitamins like vitamin K or something like that, but large intestine, ascending, transverse, descending, sigmoid is here, and then rectum, everything gets compacted and defecated out. This is where we are going to do water absorption. So if somebody ate some food and your body realizes that there's a pathogen in it, there's salmonella in the chicken that I ate, your body is going to say, get it out right now. And it's not going to hang out in the large intestine and it's not going to get the water pulled out of it like it normally should because your body is saying, evacuate now. So that's the job of the large intestine, is pulling out the water. And if food sits in there too long, it's going to be the opposite, and you're going to have a hard time going to the bathroom and be constipated instead of having diarrhea. Large intestine pulls the water out. Also is in charge of a few vitamins from our gut biome to help in this area. Moving on. Nutrition and energy production. Okay, so we are shifting to vitamins and minerals. And this is my plate. It is the government nutritional website. And if you click it, it'll take you to the website. But I always like to point out the percentages, the suggested guideline of fruits and veg versus meats and grains. My father-in-law that I keep talking about in class, he's a big steak and potatoes kind of guy. That is what he would eat all day, every day, and nothing but steak and potatoes. But you can see here that the steak and potatoes are only half of what you're supposed to be eating. You should have half of your plate, half of your servings should be fruit and veg, should be these guys. So please make sure that you're getting enough of your fruit and vegetable intake to increase your fiber. It's good for you. They're great with phytonutrients, all really important stuff. So I like to point it out on the My Plate. If you cannot take dairy, a dairy substitute, almond milk, soy milk, oat milk. Most of these things are also really high in calcium, and vegetables. Certain vegetables are really high in calcium. So it doesn't have to be dairy to get your calcium intake. Moving on, vitamins. Vitamins are going to be things that you need. You definitely need vitamins and minerals. These guys are organic. These are organic compounds. So they're going to have a carbon backbone, right? The carbon is going to be attached to a hydrogen somehow in that macromolecule. And these are organic. They can potentially be broken down. So I always like to tell the story of when I was a young new mom and I had the time before I started working. I was a stay-at-home mom. I was just in grad school and I had two small kids. And so I could stay home with them and I made their baby food because I had time to do that then. No judgment. And so if you made baby food yourself with a steamer, you can absolutely tell the difference between the steamed peas that you made versus the canned peas that you get at the store. And that's because these guys are organic compounds and you can lose them when you cook them. So you can absolutely overcook your veggies. If you notice green beans, peas, those kind of things, if they've been cooked too long, right? They're not this pretty Kelly green. They're not this pretty green that they could be. They're more of like an army green, and not that fresh, bright, beautiful green that you want to see. So you can absolutely overcook the vitamins out of your food. You don't want to do that. And how that happens on our processed food is because in big facilities, they have to cook them at high temperatures. They need to make sure that everything that comes out of that facility is safe and there's no foodborne pathogens in there. So they do cook them at a lot higher temperatures that you can get at home. You're not going to cook at those high temperatures at your house with things that you have to cook your food with. So if you are cooking stuff at home, try and make sure that you maintain the color of your food. Get those phytonutrients. You want those. You don't want to lose them during cooking. If anybody has cooked spinach, you put a little water in your pot, right? And you got some frozen spinach, or maybe you got some fresh spinach. But if you ever look at the water that comes out of your spinach, it's green, right? Because you lost some of that in the water. So these guys, you can lose them during cooking. They are organic. Vitamins and minerals are only needed in small amounts. There are two categories of vitamins and minerals. Two. One is fat soluble, and the other category is water soluble. Water soluble, those guys, you're going to bring them in when you have your food and drink. You're going to bring those water solubles in, but they don't stay. You're going to soak them in whatever your body needs at that moment. They will bring them in. Whatever your body needs will bring those things in, and the rest of the stuff that you don't need gets out of your body. If it's in food, it's going to be compacted and gone out your GI tract. If it is in liquid form and your body didn't need it, you will excrete that out. Your kidneys will get rid of it, and you will urinate that stuff out. But if it's a fat soluble vitamin, those guys, you bring them in with a little bit of fat in your diet. Your fat solubles are D, A, K, and E, and those can potentially stay in your system. Those can stay, but the water soluble ones, they don't stay. Neither one of vitamins and minerals yields any energy. They don't yield any energy when they break, when you use them. It's not like ATP that we snap off the third phosphate and boom, we've got energy. That's not how these guys work. So that's vitamins. There are lots of different ones. I do not want you to memorize every single vitamin. Please don't. If we were a nutrition class, I would ask you to know all of them and where you can get them and what they're good for. But I'm going to focus on just a few of my favorites. So this one is one of my favorites. Is folic acid. It's vitamin B and vitamin B9 specifically. And folic acid is going to help with the normal development of cells, and especially during fetal development. It can help prevent, neural tube birth defects like spina bifida. So the neural tube, your spinal column, starts forming real early, like 2 weeks later. You may not even know you're pregnant. Neural tube is starting to form. So if you're thinking about having a baby, go on prenatals now, or just adjust your diet and make sure that you're getting your leafy greens. Eat your leafy greens in a salad or however you want to get your leafy greens. Whole grains, your whole wheat, fruits, nuts, legumes are all great sources. Legumes are beans. These are all great sources for folic acid. So I always like to preach to everybody. Folic acid is a good vitamin to get either nutritionally in the foods that you bring or in a supplement like vitamins to prevent neural tube defects like spina bifida on babies. And then another one that I always like to do is vitamin C. Vitamin C, where are we going to get vitamin C? Citrus fruits, right? Citrus. So our citrus fruits, oranges, lemons, tangerines, all those guys, citrus fruits. You can also get an unlikely source, broccoli. So broccoli are leaf greens, tomatoes, vitamin C, and bell peppers, also vitamin C. So it's not just orange juice, but that's like my go-to. When I think of vitamin C, I immediately think of citrus. That's where we can get it. Why do you want vitamin C? It's going to help maintain your connective tissue, like bone and cartilage. It is also going to boost the immune system. So that is one of those that is helpful. You could all obviously take a lot, and it's not going to be like your super preventative, but it is helpful to boost your immune system. Is it going to help you fight off everything out there and their brother? No, but it does help boost the immune system to a point. But again, these are water soluble vitamins, so they're not going to stick around. They're only active when you bring them in, and your body uses them at that point. It's not going to stick around in your system, but it's good. It does boost the immune system. It helps build your bones and cartilage. Vitamin C is helping. We never talk about scurvy because nobody ever gets scurvy anymore. But if you don't have vitamin C, you could be susceptible to scurvy. So those are two that I like to talk about: folic acid, vitamin B, and vitamin C, absorbic acid. Um, I like to talk about those water soluble vitamins. Moving on to the fat soluble ones. So they are just like they sound. You get them with a little bit of fat in your diet. You can get these guys. Um, and if you are exposed to sunshine, this is one of my favorites, is vitamin D. So if you're exposed to sunshine for just 15 minutes, not a lot, just 15 minutes is all you need to help start to make vitamin D. And vitamin D is really important because it helps with calcium absorption. So calcium is going to be super important for your skeletal system, for your muscles and the action potentials, for your nervous system and its action potentials. So we want calcium for a whole bunch of stuff. Here it is: nervous system, heartbeats, blood clotting. Vitamin D is super important for that. Vitamin A is important for cell turnover. For cell turnover, so development of bones, teeth, skin, maintaining eyesight, immune system, fetal development. So if somebody has acne like I do, and you're on retin A, that retinol can potentially interfere with the cell development of baby. So they will often ask you about that and what you're taking. And if you may become pregnant, they may pull you off of it. So that is vitamin A. It's a retinol. It helps with cell turnover on all of these things. And you can see all the places where you can get this stuff. Vitamin E is important. It also helps with the immune system. It helps with the lungs, and it prevents, it's an antioxidant, lessens oxidative damage. Vitamin E. And vitamin K, clotting. So that's all I like to think about. Vitamin K sounds like clotting. So vitamin K is essential in blood clotting, which was one of our positive feedback mechanisms, was blood clotting and labor and delivery of baby. Those were positive feedback mechanisms. And in order to blood clot, you need a whole bunch of clotting factors, but vitamin K helps you get those. So vitamin K, blood clotting, and all the places where you can get it. Those are your vitamins. Moving on to the minerals. On our minerals, these guys are not organic like the vitamins. They are inorganic. We still only need a little bit of them. These, I don't care how much you cook them. You can put as much salt in your food as you want to. I don't suggest it, but you could. It doesn't matter. It's not going to get destroyed. That salt will still be there. You will still have super salty water and super salty whatever you put in it. There are major minerals and there are trace minerals, lots of them. Major is going to mean you need more of it. Minor is going to mean you need less. Just like vitamins, they don't yield any energy. There are so many minerals, so many minerals. The asterisk ones are the ones that are super important, and our major minerals are the asterisk ones, major minerals. So we have calcium, which was super important. I've talked about it, I think, 3 times in this one lecture alone about how it's important for your neurons to talk to each other on action potential, how it's important for your muscles to do action potentials, your heart to beat. So many things rely on your calcium. Your bones and your skeleton, your teeth are all calcium dependent. So calcium is a major mineral that we need for all sorts of stuff: heart health, bone, blood cells, nerve functions, all sorts of stuff. Sodium chloride is salt. So we've got chlorine as a major mineral. Iron is not a major mineral, it is a minor, but we do need it for hemoglobin production to produce the proteins that's inside of our red blood cells that carries the oxygen. We need iron. If our iron is low, you could potentially be anemic and you're not moving the oxygen like you need to. Magnesium is a major mineral. Phosphorus, potassium. So we talked about in 1107 the active and passive transport. And active transport was the sodium potassium pump. but we talked about kicking out 3 sodiums, and we brought in 2 potassiums inside of the cell and 3 sodiums on outside the cell, and we use ATP to do this. Sodium and potassium are major minerals that we keep track of all the time, and we need to have a happy homeostasis range for those things. Potassium, where can you get potassium? Bananas are my first thing. That's my go-to. Anytime I'm thinking about potassium, like maybe you're having muscle cramps, banana. Sodium, most of us don't have low sodium. That is usually something that we all get because most of us do have some sort of occasional processed food. So usually our sodium levels are really good. It is really rare if you are hyponatremic, but it could happen. I've seen it happen at a Spartan race where somebody was racing. We were doing a beast, and a beast is like, it was like 13 miles or something like that. And they were only drinking the water and they weren't drinking the electrolytes. They were just drinking water. And if you don't get enough electrolytes and you are sweating, you run the potential of running out of sodium. Your sodium gets too low, you're hyponatremic. Most of us don't have a problem with sodium. Yeah, those are the vitamins and the minerals. If you see the word essential, it is something that your body cannot create. You need to get it in your food. You need to bring it in on your diet. So there are essential amino acids that you have to consume. So you have to bring it in on your body. You want a variety of food in your diet. You want lots of food. A great idea to think in your head is just go for a rainbow. Try and get a variety of colors in your diet. The more colors, the better. If everything is fried and brown, that's a sad meal. You want lots of colors. Lots of colors are good because you've got lots of vitamins and minerals in there. If we wanted to go way into the vitamin minerals nutrition section, we absolutely could, but I'm not gonna. I am moving on. We are skipping on to metabolic pathways. Metabolism. Metabolism is going to be, we have an official definition out of our outline. All of the chemical reactions that occur in an organism is your metabolism. What are the chemical reactions? The chemical reactions come in 2 categories. There are anabolic and there are catabolic. Catabolic is super cheesy. It's dad joke time. Cats have paws with claws, and my cats, not my 2 current cats, but my 2 past cats, were notorious for shredding my furniture. They would shred my furniture. They would take my big, large sofa and they would shred the sides into tiny little strips of fabric. A catabolic reaction takes a large molecule like this guy and breaks it up into small things, shreds it into small things. Catabolic shreds big molecules into small things. So we could say like this is glucose over here, and it's going to break down into, remember our equations from 1107, it's going to break down into CO2 and water and energy. We would break down into ATP. So big molecule into small ones, catabolic. So when we break those bonds in the glucose molecule, when we break those covalent bonds, we release energy, and that energy doesn't turn into, but we transfer it into ATP. Anabolic, we're going to take the small ones. We start with small things, and we're going to use them to build a big molecule. So this would be the opposite. This would be photosynthesis. CO2 and water are over here, and we will use them to build the big glucose molecule over here. But we got to create the bonds. So in order to create the bonds, energy has to go in. This is an endergonic reaction. Energy goes in to it. And that, if we were talking about plants, for example, in photosynthesis, the light energy, the photo energy comes in to make the bigger molecule. Anabolic, catabolic, cats have paws and claws, and they shred big things into little things. Anabolic makes me think of anabolic steroids, where people are trying to bulk up and get bigger. So hopefully those things will help you remember. Anabolic is the small stuff. Energy comes in and it builds a bigger molecule. Catabolic is going to take a big molecule and shred it into teeny tiny little molecules. And when it does that, it breaks bonds. And when it breaks bonds, energy goes out of the reaction. And we can harvest that energy in ATP. 40% is going to go into ATP. 40% is ATP. And then 60% goes off as heat. So energy cannot be created or destroyed, right? It just thermodynamics. It just transfers into something else. So ATP, and then heat is the other 60% when we break down glucose. But all of this together, all of our catabolic and all of our anabolic reactions summarize into metabolic. Here is our equation for catabolism and glucose. Cellular respiration ends up with our CO2 and our H2O, our ATP, which is our 40%, and our heat would be our 60% over here. If we are trying to regulate blood sugar, which we do, our body is doing this all day, every day, unless we've got an autoimmune issue going on. But if blood sugar is high, insulin is going to lower the blood sugar. If blood sugar is low, you are starving. It's been hours and hours since you ate last. Glucagon comes along and it's going to raise your blood sugar. Both insulin and glucagon are produced in that super duper important organ that I was telling y'all about before, the pancreas. So the pancreas does exocrine secretions. The pancreas does endocrine hormone secretions. The pancreas, it's doing it all. So insulin and glucagon, both of them regulate blood sugar. Insulin's going to take high blood sugar and lower it down. Like maybe you just had your meal, and if you have diabetes, if you've got type 1 diabetes, you're going to need your insulin pump, or however you're getting your insulin, and put insulin in your body to lower the blood sugar. If you were really, really hungry and you haven't eaten in a while, glucagon is going to be released also from the pancreas, and that's going to go into your sugar storage in your skeletal muscle, in your liver, and raise the sugar level of your blood. So glucose and insulin, glucagon and insulin help your glucose levels. Oh, there's so much stuff in it. It's just a process that I don't want to cover all these teeny tiny details. We're 45 minutes into this lecture already. Okay. We got this. We got this. We're going to do this. Components of the GI system, we've already talked about. We know all of the anatomy parts because we just talked about that earlier. Functions, what's it doing? What's it doing? Ingestion, bringing in the food. I am putting the food in my mouth and chewing, putting it in. When I chew my food, that's the mechanical processing I was talking about. You chew your food with your teeth, mash it around. Your stomach is going to churn with its smooth muscles, and it's going to churn. It's going to do mechanical processing. Then we talk about how you can secrete lingual lipase or salivary amylase, these enzymes that break down the different macros, chemical processing. Then we talk about how the food moves in a food bolus, and it's going to go along the GI tract, and it's going to move in these rhythmic contractions that go along the GI tract called, anybody remember? Peristalsis. Peristalsis moves the food bolus through. So it's going to be propulsion via peristalsis. We talk about all these secretion of all of these different enzymes to break down the things. And then once we've broken down these things from these complex macromolecules into individual monomers, whatever those monomers were, if it was a monosaccharide or an amino acid, whatever the monomer was, we're going to absorb those things. So we got absorption of the organic molecules. And then whatever's left over that we don't want, compact that stuff together and then defecate it out. So I've got some cool videos. If you have the time and desire to see how your GI tract works, one of these has a camera. Person swallows down the camera and you get to see like live action footage of it running through the GI tract. So if that floats your boat, do it. I would not suggest watching it while you're eating because I personally find it gross if I'm eating and watching that happen. But that's up to you. Macromolecules, the carbs. You can see we talked about amylase. We mentioned this one before. Amylase breaks down carbs. And so it's got our complex carb, which is a polysaccharide. Lots and lots and lots of, here are our different polysaccharides, right? We got cellulose over here. And it's really complex. Here are all the different sugars strung together. And then we could go from a polysaccharide. This is our disaccharide. And then now we've got an individual monosaccharide. So polysaccharides, disaccharides are 2 sugars. Monosaccharide is a 1 sugar. And then you can see the names for all these different ones. We have glucose. Glucose and fructose is sucrose. Glucose and galactose is maltose. Lactose, sorry. And the enzymes that break that down. Maltase is going to break down that one. Sucrase is going to break down sucrose. Lactase is going to break down lactose. If you are lactose intolerant, you don't have this enzyme. You are missing this enzyme, but that enzyme is really low in production if you don't produce a whole bunch of that enzyme lactase, and you are lactose intolerant. So if you're not producing the enzyme yourself, if you're not producing lactase, you can still break it down, but you're relying on that gut biome. You're relying on your gut bacteria to break it down for you, and not lactase. And when that happens, it's going to produce gas and make you a little bit bloated and uncomfortable, because it's not breaking it down with lactase, which can do it a little bit better. So that's lactase. It breaks down lactose. There it is. Lactose right there. Carbs, macromolecules, the digestive enzymes. If you see amylase, I want you to think carbs. You see amylase, think carbs. Proteins. Proteins are going to be broken down in the stomach. Peptides. All of these protein digesting enzymes. So it starts in the stomach. We also have a ton coming out of the pancreas that can break down proteins. So we've got pepsin, peptidase, and then the ones from the pancreas. All of these, I'm not going to make you memorize all of these. If you were in AP2, you would need to know these, but I'm not going to make you memorize these as 1108. But there are different ones that break down proteins. My rule when I tell my AP2 students that have to memorize these things, a lot of these guys have a P in their name: dipeptidase, aminopeptidase, carboxypeptidase, chymotrypsin. A lot of them have P's in their name, and that helps me remember that those break down proteins, which also start with P's. Proteins are going to break down into, I don't have their molecular structure, but they will break down into individual amino acids. There'll be this type of amino acid, alanine or something like that, and this other type of amino acid. And when we put all the amino acids together, when we talk about protein structure in 1107, it makes our complex proteins. Lipids are other macromolecule. The fats. So remember I was telling you how you need bile and lipase? So here's what the bile does. Here's the bile. So we got our big globs of fat right here. Bile comes along, the green stuff produced by your liver and stored away in the gallbladder is going to emulsify the fats, and it turns them from big globs into smaller blobs. It acts like your Dawn dish soap, and it emulsifies them into smaller bits. Now that you've got them into smaller bits, we can use this bad boy, the lipase, to break it down. So we went from our triglyceride. So our triglyceride has 3 fatty acid chains and a glycerol head right here. And these are our 3 chains. That's our triglyceride. Now we can get to that. We can get to those and we can break them down with lipase. And now we have 1 chain and a glycerol head. We got a monoglyceride, and we have snapped off these 2 fatty acid chains. So we've gone down to a monoglyceride. We're going to package those things up in little micelles, and they're going to go through those simple columnar cells in the GI tract. And the fats, if we have long chain fatty acids, those don't go straight into the bloodstream. We put those through the lymphatic system. So this is a question that I harp on my AP2 students. I'm not going to ask y'all to make sure you know that, but fats, long chain fatty acids, complex fats like that, those guys go into the lymphatic system. They don't go into the bloodstream straight away like our carbs do and our proteins do. Fats go in the lymphatic system. They go through the body. They get dumped into lymphatic system over here on the left side of your body. AP2 stuff. Yeah, I'm not going to go through all of the secretions on all of the nitty gritty details found in 34.3 that I've got in there. Now, be sure you pay attention to test review for this chapter on what specifically we got to know, because there's too much information in here. It's just too much, and I'm trying to stay surface level. So let's keep going. There's not much left. I promise we're almost done. Almost done. Where are we? We are on 34.4 phases of gastric secretion. These are super easy to think about. There are just 3 phases. If you think of cephalic, I want you to think of your head. Cephalics when you're thinking about it. You are daydreaming about how yummy and delicious something would taste right now. You pass by a restaurant, a bakery, and you smell some fresh baked cookies in there. You're thinking about it, cephalic phase. Your mouth starts watering, right? Your stomach lets you know that, oh yeah, you forgot to eat. You're really hungry. You want this. So you got cephalic phase that starts first, then you eat the food and you got that cookie. You got the cookie, so now it's in your stomach, gastric phase. And we talked about all those secretions and the churning of the stomach, and it moves, 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 gastric phase. And then we're going to go into the last phase where we want to absorb the stuff. We're absorbing the stuff in the intestinal phase. So 3 phases of gastric secretions. Thinking about it, cephalic, you ate it, it's in your stomach, gastric. And now you've broken it down and you are absorbing the nutrients in your small intestine, intestinal phase. Can we regulate these? Yeah, we just talked about those 3 things. At the last page, heck yeah, it's our last page. And the outline are these guys, are hormones involved in things. So we've got our feeding hormones, things that are telling us that we need to eat. So one of my favorite ones to talk about is ghrelin. Ghrelin is one that sounds like gremlin to me. It is your hangry hormone. When you are hungry, your stomach is going to let you know this appetite enhancer is ghrelin, and it's your hangry hormone that says, hey, you need to eat. You really need to eat. You're hungry. It is ghrelin. You might be a gremlin if you're really hungry. Ghrelin. Other one up here, orexin. Orexin is another appetite enhancer. It's another type of neurotransmitter that's an appetite enhancer. There are 2 that are specific craving type of neurotransmitters. So if you are craving carbs, that is one of my go-tos. Late at night, I will crave, if I'm stress eating, I might crave cheesy popcorn. So that's carbs and neuropeptide Y, carbs. And then we got gallinin. Sometimes I just want a bite of cheese. So if I'm craving like a piece of cheese high in fat, gallinin, fatty foods. So those are our feeding ones. Orexin and ghrelins are appetite enhancers. You are hungry. You're hungry. You need to eat. If you're craving a specific thing, neuropeptide Y will have you craving carbs. Gallinin is going to have you craving fats. If you have eaten, you got other things that come along. So these are your satieties. Serotonin. I don't know about you guys, but when I eat something that's something I really wanted, makes me happy. Makes me happy. Serotonin. It's the I'm full, happy, satisfied, happy hormone. Serotonin. Somatostatin. It's got statin in the name. It sounds like status or keeping still, maintaining a stasis. Somatostatin is going to stop the stomach motility. You have eaten already, and we are good. And we don't need to keep activating the stomach and having the churn and all that. We need to shut it down. We're okay. We're full. We don't need any more. Somatostatin is going to shut it down. Leptin. If you have adipose cells, and all of us have adipose cells, your fat cells are going to produce leptin. The more fat cells you have, the more leptin you will produce. So leptin is produced by the adipose cells, and it will also tell you we're full, we're satiated, we don't need that. We don't need that. So leptin is coming from your fat cells, your adipose. And this other one, this last one is CCK. It's an abbreviation for cholecystokinin, CCK. And CCK is going to be when you eat certain things. Have you eaten carbs, or you eaten fats, or you eaten proteins? When you eat those things, it's going to trigger CCK, and it's going to tell the body that we are good. We need to absorb the food that we've already eaten. Don't eat anymore. This is a cool thing talking about the enteric endocrine system. So we talk about how you have central nervous system, right? That controls stuff, communicates stuff. But they also talk about how your gut has its own kind of nervous system to it. So if you're curious about that, enteric endocrine system, and information about that, you can click that, check that out. But we are done. We are done. I kept it under an hour. So that is chapter 34 on digestive system. It's our very last chapter before exam 3. Please listen to the exam audio and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.